I get a surprisingly large number of questions about light, and more specifically around UV light and the bleaching that could happen with comics. And so in this video, we are going to speak a little bit about that, and we're also going to try to address people's concerns with the comics that I hang on the wall behind me. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. As you heard in that brief intro, we are going to talk about light. Light is literally everywhere you look, and the question is, how much danger does this light actually pose to your comics? One of the things that I've seen repeatedly pop up in the comment section is people expressing some concern regarding the comics that I hang on the wall behind me. And oftentimes people will say, are you worried about the comics back there? Are you concerned at all? Do you have any fears? The long and short of it is no, I don't. I don't live my life generally from a place of fear. I am a huge fan of identifying the challenge that is before me and coming up with ways to mitigate, negate, overcome whatever that challenge happens to be. So I don't focus on fear, I focus on fixing the problems. That is generally how I handle it. But I think that the question behind the question is that people want to display their comics, but they want to do them as safely as possible. But they, instead of asking that question, they talk about me and my collection, and it's just a little backwards. So I want to talk a little bit about light bulbs. I want to talk a little bit about this because I think that the facts around light bulbs may actually help people to understand the danger that may or may not be present with at least one source of light, that being light that comes from the lights inside of your house. And this actually comes from the FDA. The FDA says, the question is, do CFLs emit UV, right? Ultraviolet light. All fluorescent lamps emit some UV. Typically, fluorescent bulbs, including CFLs, which are these required bulbs, these CFLs, which consumers would encounter, emit very low levels of UV. So not only do these bulbs produce UV, they also emit UV. And that's important because those are two different measurements. And you'll see why that's important here in a second. But it says in order to measure any ultraviolet radiation from these lamps, very sensitive measuring equipment must be used. So long and short of it in my mind is, yes, CFLs produce and emit UV, but it appears to be a very, very small amount. I think this also holds true for LEDs. So if you have these CFL bulbs or LEDs in your house, it seems like there is a low risk associated with UV being emitted, which could damage your comics. But there was another section here in this factoid, or this facts document about lights, and it says, are there precautions I can take to reduce the small levels of UV from CFLs still further if I should wish to do so? And it says the glass used in CFLs already provides a UV filtering effect. So the glass itself is part of what filters it out. So again, it produces it, but not everything that is produced is emitted because the glass itself actually filters some of that UV. It says, in addition, any additional glass or plastic or fabric used in the lighting fixture that is between you and the CFL will further reduce the already low levels to still lower levels, since these materials act as additional UV filters. Increasing the distance between you and any radiation source, including CFLs, will also reduce the small level to a lower level. And it goes on to talk about some additional steps that people may want to take. But generally speaking, There's not a whole lot of UV that is produced, nor is there a whole lot that is actually emitted, which means that the risk posed from overhead lights or even like these filming lights that I use is relatively low. And there's ways to kind of mitigate some of that stuff even further. And a little bit later in this video, we'll take a look at some of those steps as well as some products that you may want to check out. Another huge source, of course, of light is what comes from the sun. And so I think the way to mitigate the risk from UV damage caused by sunlight is to make sure that if you are displaying your comics, you're doing so in a way that does not put them in either direct or indirect light. Direct light is my guess here is it would damage the comics a lot faster than indirect, but you may want to avoid both if you have some concerns. For my room here, my light source is actually more than 16 feet away from the comics that are on my wall. So I don't get any direct sunlight on those comics in any way, shape, or form. And the indirect light is also somewhat far away. And again, I don't necessarily worry about it. But if you do, if you are concerned, there are some steps that you can actually take. One of those steps is right here. This is one of the products that I'll try to link in the description. This is BDF window film, and this is a clear window film that can be applied either to a light fixture or to a window itself to reduce the amount of UV that actually enters a room. And I purchased this several years ago directly from Amazon. And again, I'll put a link in the description so folks can check it out. It's relatively simple to install, so you shouldn't have any problems if you follow the directions. And I think there's a video on the Amazon page as well. This is a clear film that can be applied. Another thing that you can do is to basically get either blackout curtains that block all the light altogether, or you can actually get a blackout film. And in previous rooms where my external light source was a lot closer to my actual comics, I actually completely blacked out the room and just used the lights inside the room to illuminate things. So speaking of products, I thought that I would show you my jury-rigged solution for reducing the amount of UV coming off of an LED light. And you can see here on this super ratty light setup that I've applied a piece of cloth to basically reduce the amount of UV coming off of this LED. But when you peel back the top layer, you can see there's an additional layer of protection there. I used a piece of the film from the roll that I just showed earlier in the video to further reduce the amount of UV coming off of this LED. And I used this setup when I was in a different setting and had a much smaller studio, but a lot of little small lights, and I wanted to try to take as many precautions as possible, and this was one way that I actually did it. The other thing I'll mention to you is that there are companies out there, including BCW, that sell display cases that have some UV resistant properties, and I'll try to link to the BCW product in the description of this video, but they have various size cases that allow you to display your raw comics, and there are again some UV resistant properties built into the acrylics that are used. I think Gator Guard has a similar technology for its case as well. So you definitely want to look into these things and figure out whether this is something that you want to do to provide an additional level of security if you opt to display your comics. Another huge thing, rotating your comics out. So you're not having the same books on the wall month after month, year after year. You're rotating them, which also further mitigates and minimizes some of that risk. So just a couple of things for people to consider. At the end of the day, if you have any real and legit concerns about sun damage, do not display your comics, right? It is super simple. Do not display your comics if you have concerns. I don't necessarily have those concerns, or I've mitigated those concerns away, and that gives me the comfort to display my comics. I like to display them because it allows me to enjoy my collection. It gives people an opportunity that watch my video to see something different from my collection, and that's why I do it. But if you don't feel comfortable, never substitute my judgment or anyone else's judgment for your own. Just don't do it. If you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yo, should you practice art? Or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master. The one that's more than a rapper. The one that's an educator. The one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts. He's got the mindset expansive. He understands that it's time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan. Straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations. Synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting. Indian style and the gold.